whenever people think of Autotune, they have this funny thing that they hear in their heads, but that is not what it is actually, and that's what we want to show you with this episode.
It can be if you want.
It can
but
be.
It doesn't have to be that.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedict Hein, and I'm here with my co-host, mastering engineer from stonemastering.com, Malcolm Owen Flood. How are you, Malcolm?
I'm great, man. I'm good. It's been a wild week. We had some baby pigs arrive at the farm today. By the way, my studio is on a farm where I live as well, and there's like chickens, horses, and pigs at this moment. But the pigs escaped as soon as we got them, and it was like an all-day ordeal trying to track down these 3 baby pigs who had just like vanished into the woods and other farms. And they even ended up on the highway at one point, which was just terrifying. So there's like cars honking and baby pigs running all over the place. It was very close to being like a huge disaster. You don't want to be the farm that's responsible for 3 baby pigs getting hit by cars, but we actually managed to get them and catch them and bring them back to our farm, and they're now lazing it up in their pen, totally happy. So
that's good.
It all
news.
worked out, but it was like, oh my god! I've got like a video. My girlfriend Beth actually tracked them down on a neighbor's farm. She found them, which was a miracle, and they were gone for like 2 hours or something, by the way. So it was like 2 hours without even seeing them. It was like, oh my god, they're gone. They could be anywhere. But she found them, and then we managed to catch them, which is too long of a story for this podcast. But I've got a video of us carrying them back, which like we had to carry them like, I don't know, like 10 acres or something. It was like a long way to carry a pig. They're heavy. But yeah.
That's so amazing.
So,
I didn't know about the farm thing at all. I mean,
yeah.
you were talking about like you were not like directly in the city, and so I imagine some like you were mentioning a lake or whatever. I think when we were talking about
yeah. There's lakes around, and we're on an island, so
yeah.
But yeah, I live on a farm. It's mostly an equestrian farm. Like my mom, who owns the property, is an equestrian coach. So it's mostly horse stuff, but chickens and pigs as well.
That's awesome. I didn't tell you about this, I think, but I live on a horse farm as well. It's not ours, but like the people who like own this building, they do have a farm like that, and we have chickens and ducks and horses here as well. So, but no pigs.
Wild.
But yeah, so like right next to this wall, like behind me, beside me. Right behind this wall, there are, I think, 6 horses right now. So, yeah.
Crazy.
Well, I know how that is.
You and I meet and talk every week for a long time now. And like well before this podcast, by the way, because this is episode 17 of the podcast, but we've been meeting weekly for a lot longer than that. And I had no idea that there was horses next to you.
Yeah. Yes, right? It's awesome. So, and the last weird thing to add to this, because I just have to to say it, is do you... You said chickens and horses and pigs, right?
And pigs, yeah.
Then
dogs and
dogs,
cats.
Yeah, cats as well here. Do you know about those walking? I don't know the English word for it. Those walking ducks, like they cannot fly, but they walk like pretty. Like they look pretty funny because they walk like upright, and they only walk, and they are pretty fast, and they eat snails.
What?
Yeah, there's ducks. They are called I don't know the English word for it. I think it's just walking ducks that are that eat snails all day and can't fly. And we used to have, or our neighbors used to have those, and now my wife thinks about getting some of those for us as well, because we have a little like water pond next to our garden where they could live, and like we have no other neighbors and stuff, so they can just run around freely, and we have a lot of vegetables and stuff in the garden, so they could protect us from the snails eating our salad. And I was just curious if you know about these and if you have some of these as well, maybe, because a lot of people have here.
I don't think so. Everything, all the birds around here can fly. I guess other than the chickens, they can't really fly very well. But.
Yeah. I will, if I remember, I will post a picture of a duck like that in the show notes, just in case if people are wondering what the fuck I'm talking about. Because, anyway,
The self-producing
Funny
farmer.
creatures. Yeah, self-producing band. We are on topic here. Today's episode is about vocal tuning. And why vocal tuning is not only for pop music, where it is used as a kind of sometimes cheesy effect. It is something that is done on basically every single professional production almost. And we're going to talk about that today.
Well, I think the first kind of myth we need to dispel that a lot of people don't understand is that, well, I guess the most prevalent tuner is called Autotune. That's the one that most people know of, at least over here. And in the name Autotune, there's kind of a misconception because everybody assumes it's just this automatic thing you slap on and it just makes your voice sound like T-Pain or, insert any other famous kind of pop singer who has that tuned vocal effect going on. And it can do that, but when the stuff was actually kind of invented and what it was made to do was to manually tune stuff, to tune vocals so that we could actually go and grab a single word in a vocal performance and change the pitch of it a little bit to get it a little bit more in tune, a little more perfect. So the misconception that I run into most is that people don't understand that this is like an intentional process. We're going in to change something on purpose and as much as we want to. Just like drum editing or guitar editing, like it's the same as any other editing in that it's very intentional and we're doing it to achieve a certain result. So it's called Autotune, but it's actually manual tune. And then there's a bunch of different brands that do the same kind of thing. So there's Melodyne and Waves Tune and stuff like that as well. But what we're talking about, for the most part, is actually manually vocal tuning.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference in that. Because manual vocal tuning, if done right, you can't even tell it was done. That's the goal. It should be totally transparent in most cases.
Absolutely, that's the goal. And I think there is an automatic part to it. To be honest, I don't even use Autotune that much. I use the built-in tuning thing in Cubase most of the time, and I used Melodyne a lot. So there it is, very much manual tuning. But with Autotune, I mean, you can give it like the certain like parameters and then let it do its thing automatically. And there's also this real-time Autotune thing. So there is an automatic part to it, but you still have to you have to feed it some information and make sure it does it correctly. And it's not that you push one button and then it spits out this weirdly sounding thing with a lot of artifacts and this effect sounding, stuff that we know. And when we think of Autotune, so right, it should sound totally natural if done right, and it does. And actually, a friend of ours, John McLucas, shout out to him. He does great content as well. And I think he just launched or is about to launch a vocal production course, by the way. Mm-hmm. Might link to that in the show notes. But he did an A/B test, I think. So if I remember correctly, he has a video out where he compared, or he had people listen to several audio files, and some of them were tuned and some of them were not, I think. And he just wanted to know if people can spot tuned vocals. And I don't know how he exactly did it. I just saw the title and the caption, so I'd be curious to watch it myself. But I think that I'm pretty sure that the result was that people, and he used some like even pros like with good developed hearing for it, and they couldn't tell which of the tracks were tuned and which are not. So correct me if I'm wrong, John, if you're listening to this, but I think I'm right, and I will post the link to that video because that goes to show that even people with experienced ears can't tell the difference if it's done right. So
yeah, I also haven't seen that, but I'm sure it's great. John's videos are awesome.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised by that result at all. It's something I would do in almost all my productions. Like, so get to mixing essentially, and I'd do like a prep session before mixing, and in that I would tighten up vocals, or my assistant would, because I actually like spend way too much time when I tune, so I hire other people to do it instead.
Yeah,
it's not economic for me to do it myself, they never notice, like, or they just like, oh, it sounds great. It's like, well, yeah, it sounds better than it did before even. So it's totally common. like more common than you could ever imagine. I would say that most productions have it.
Absolutely. The thing about this is that it isn't about, and that's why people might be so afraid of it. It isn't about absolute perfection. It's about getting an already great performance to be like spot on, or to correct little mistakes in an otherwise flawless performance. Meaning that if you have a lot of emotion and like vibe in a performance, which is great and the most important thing, but you just missed one note, or it's like the entire thing might be sharp slightly or flat, and now you can use that emotionally awesome like take with all the vibe and energy and just correct the tuning. And that's what this is all about. It's not about making everything sound the same or about absolute perfection. It doesn't need to be. Sometimes it's even cool if something is slightly flat or sharp or whatever. It's sometimes that people use stuff like that, but most of the time we don't want that to be audible, and we want it to be at least in the ballpark of what we would consider a perfect note, and without destroying any of the vibe and energy. So that I think it's not only this cheesy sounding effect. It's also people might be afraid of like a cookie cutter approach where everything sounds the same. So it's not about that at all.
No. That's the greatest benefit, actually, what you said right there. Vocal tuning can take an emotional take that is imperfect in a pitch perspective, or from a pitch point of view, but it can salvage it. So vocal tuning can kind of save an emotional take and make it usable, or make it a little bit better. Like sometimes you tune it a little bit to get it closer, but it's still out, and it just works because there's so much emotion in it. It takes a lot of pressure off of the vocalist, actually, once they kind of can grasp that we're looking for passion more than we're looking for pitch, really. And then as a result, ironically, once they're not focusing on pitch so much, they start singing more in tune and and just get a better vocal performance all around. So we've kind of talked about that in the past, I guess, on our vocal episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that comes to mind here is that there is a thing that you could use. It's a little advanced, but I heard a lot of people use it, and I've tried it myself. And I don't record as often anymore these days, but I think it's a great idea. There is this Autotune RealTime plugin that you can use while tracking, and if you don't want to risk anything, you could like put it on a separate track and just record the vocal on 2 tracks at the same time. One has the Autotune plugin, and another one that doesn't have it, and you can put that on the headphone mix of the singer so that they hear their corrected performance, which can be cool. Can also sometimes it's not, depending on how good the singer actually is, but it can be cool because it makes them confident. And it also, if done right, and this works amazingly well, it saves a lot of work because most of the notes, or at least the most important stuff, is already where it belongs. So tracking through this Autotune plugin that is set up correctly is really works surprisingly well, sounds surprisingly natural, and it's a great workflow enhancement. So if you have that, or if you want to try that, give it a shot. It's really interesting. I haven't done it too much, but I've seen a lot of big people use it, and I've tried it, and I think it's a great idea. So yeah, a little advanced, but something to try out here. I think what you said about can alleviate stress from the singer is actually a big one, because it really can feel weird, and especially for people that are not used to tracking vocals a lot, that are not used to the studio. Like the reality that even when they when they do their best performances, there's still always this one note or one part that it's not right there. And even the best singers have issues with that. Even the best vocalists sometimes miss a note. And if you're not used to the studio, and then you realize that this is just part of it, and that your performances are not flawless, it can be hard to handle. And if you can show the singer a quick, or like if your bandmate sings and you record it, and you can show them a quickly corrected version of the performance, and just communicate that it's not a big deal and it can easily be corrected, and that the takes themselves are great because they're emotional and have energy and all that. That's kind of a relief. And yeah, I think it has to be communicated well, but if you can get a quick workflow going and just show the person singing that it's not a big deal if they miss a note, as long as they perform great, this can be awesome.
Yeah. But that brings up the next big point, and that is that there's an experience factor in that you need to know what is possible and what is not possible to be tuned. Because there is definitely such thing as too far out of tune to be salvaged. So if you learn how to tune a little bit, you'll quickly find that line of what can be corrected and still sound natural without it turning into a robot voice. And I think that's important to get that experience, because if you don't, you might just kind of start assuming that everything's going to work out, or vice versa, spend way too much time just like getting takes that were already good, and just like over singing. So I think there's a lot of benefit in learning how to tune, at least a little bit. But if you get one of these RealTime tuners that Benny was just mentioning, like there's Autotune RealTime and there's also Waves Tune RealTime, and both are great. I've actually got both, and the cool thing about those is that because they're auto, they're not manual. You have to put in some information, but more or less they are making decisions based on their algorithm. And if they are choosing the wrong note, chances are you are too far out of tune. So they can kind of be this good little roadmap that if they're triggering the wrong way, or it sounds unnatural, it's like, okay, well, I could probably sing that a little bit better. And then this tuner wouldn't have to work as hard. And then that would kind of help you know that your untuned version is pretty close. So you can kind of use these as like roadmaps, which is something I actually haven't done a lot of, but I have seen, like some other engineers making use of this technology in that way, which is a pretty new thing. Real-time tuners are like the last few years, I think, at least in software formats.
Absolutely, it is, and that's a great idea that you were talking about here. And one similar thing to that is also, not only are people sometimes a little too far off, but in the stuff that I get to mix a lot and that I use to track a lot, the heavier stuff, sometimes what people do is a mix of singing and screaming, or like a very it's like a melodic type of screaming actually. And this stuff can be really hard to tune, because some of those tuning softwares have a hard time detecting the actual note if it's not a clearly like sung note. And if you're having trouble hitting certain notes, but you want them where they should be, and you want to rely on tuning afterwards, using a real-time tuner can also tell you if it's actually tunable, or if you need to sing a little cleaner maybe, or if you have to try to nail the note because Autotune cannot correct it. So
right,
I got that a lot actually with punk rock bands and hardcore bands and stuff, where they thought I could easily tune it, and then it turns out it's just too like rough sounding to even tune it. And
it's like the distortion are like in their voice, kind of creates artifacts in tuners sometimes and stuff like that, and it just makes it really hard to track the pitch.
Exactly. So that's a great idea. So you should probably try using one of those, or just learn how to use the standard Autotune plugin, or Melodyne, or Cubase built-in function, or whatever, because there are some benefits to that. It can save you money, because when you if you get to the point where you can do vocal tuning completely on your own, you can do that before sending your stuff off to mixing, and you kind of skip the otherwise necessary step of vocal editing and tuning. And it is a necessary step. So every good mixing engineer will just either do it, or will talk to you about it and suggest it to you if you didn't do vocal tuning, because that's just part of making a song sound great. And if you can do that on your own and deliver great vocal tracks that are already sounding amazing, then you can save some money. And as we said, it helps you learn something about yourself and helps you become a better singer, because you learn where you're lacking. And maybe some people tend to be constantly a little flat or a little sharp sometimes. So using a plugin like that, or tuning your vocals manually, tells you something about how you sing, or your singer sings.
Yes.
It's also a big one, I think. And at the same time, it develops your hearing, or it helps develop your hearing, because I found when the more I edited vocals or tuned vocals, the more I actually noticed when something was off. And I remember when I started out, I didn't know about this at all. I thought that takes were like awesome and flawless. And when I now listen to those, they could have needed editing and tuning, but I kind of needed to develop my hearing first to even notice that really. And so that definitely helps. And
I'm really glad you. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I just can't believe that I can't believe we haven't brought that up before. That like what you get from doing these things, from even recording drums or recording guitars, and then kind of zooming in to see how your performance was and trying to fix it in editing, is like the quickest way to get better at stuff. You're like, okay, well, I'm always behind. Like you can take that information to the bank, right, and act on it. Same with singing, especially with singing. You're like, you can end especially with vocal tuning, because it literally shows you what you sang, and you can visually see that you're flat or sharp, or that maybe when you attack a note, you always start high and swoop down. That's a common one. There's really, and you can see your vibrato, how wide your vibrato is going. There's tons of information you can learn from looking at a vocal tuning plugin. So great point, Benny. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much to learn. I can tell that I can say that I learned a lot from doing that as well. Things that I didn't know I needed to learn, but I definitely did. So, same as what you were talking about. I outsource vocal editing and tuning now as well, but I'm so glad I did it for a long time myself, because I learned a lot from it. So, yeah. And then there's another thing, and I'm curious to hear if you ever used it for that. Did you ever use a tuning plugin or Melodyne or whatever to come up with harmonies or show harmonies to a singer, come up with ideas?
Yes, definitely. Not for a while, but I totally have. And mainly it's kind of like an easy way to experiment. You can just yank stuff around and see how it sounds. It saves you from having to sing it yourself, to like make an example track or anything like that. I try to push the bands to like come up with their own harmonies as much as possible. But when you absolutely need to, this is a really cool way to go. Ironically, my favorite plugin for this is Soundtoy's Little Altar Boy, which is not like a good sounding tuner at all. Like it's purposely kind of like fake sounding, and you can only do like a semitone at a time, right? But it's just so quick for me to make stuff happen and get ideas kind of just like swoop around until I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. And then I automate it in. So, or at least it gets us like to the first note and we can figure it out from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. I use the Cubase built-in function sometimes. I just duplicate the track and I only do it. I mean, it's always best when the bands come up with that stuff themselves. But in case like your band records and your singer has like, or whoever is in charge, the songwriter, whoever has a hard time with coming up with harmonies, or you are the songwriter and you have an idea and you want to show it to the rest of the band without having to sing it yourself, you can just duplicate the track. That's what I always did, and then just grab the notes and pull them wherever you think they should be, and then play it back with the original, and it will sound pretty good. I mean, there are even productions where I cheated like that, and I put a voice, like an harmony in there in the final mix that wasn't there before. So you could even do that, or an octave up or down or something if it's very subtle. So you can even do stuff like that. And it works surprisingly well. And that's just a cool little trick, because sometimes the people who have the best ideas are not necessarily the ones who can sing it right away. So if you have a great idea, that might be it.
Yeah, I've definitely snuck in the occasional octave or fifth down kind of, tune. It's tricky because normally when you are using like a pitch shifter to achieve a harmony like that, you have to keep it pretty low in volume, but it can still work for sure.
Yeah.
But ideally somebody sings it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, right. So, try to learn it. Try to learn some vocal tuning at least. And if you enjoy it and if you get great results, maybe you can get to a point where you can do it completely on your own and deliver great results. And then that can save you money as well. And you already know what your final take is going to sound like. So definitely worth trying it. I mean, I really want to say that again, because that's also something that people might not be aware of. If you take your song to mixing, I think most mixing engineers will ask for tuned vocals or will tune them themselves or talk to you about this. So I get it a lot where people send me stuff that is not tuned, and then I ask if they want to, like, if we should tune them because they are like not, they don't sound tuned, or they don't sound in tune. And then often people will respond with, "No, we don't want tuned vocals. Just leave them as they are." And I understand where they come from, but it can be a problem, and it usually people who mix a lot of stuff, they know when the song would benefit from tuned vocals and when it would not. So it's worth trusting those people, and it's worth knowing about all this, and it's worth trying it yourself to find out that you don't need to be afraid of. Because whenever someone asks you to send tuned vocals, they don't want them to sound like robotic or whatever. They just want to help the song. And if the song needs it and somebody with experience tells you you should maybe tune your vocals, you should give it a shot. And I don't think that too many people are aware of that is just such a common thing.
Yeah. Back on episode 14, we had an episode about why you need to get a producer, even if it's you. And it's always the projects where there's no producer when they're like, no, leave the vocals. And it's like, well, okay, nobody's taking responsibility for the quality of this vocal performance. And that's why nobody's willing to kind of step up and fix it. And just so everybody understands, it is the industry standard to have your vocal production tuned before it goes to mixing. That is the usual thing. That is what, if you send it to a pro mixer, they're going to expect the files to be prepared as they are intended for mixing. So tuning is part of editing, not mixing. And some mixers will offer that service, and some might even just do it for you. But as a rule, assume that you need to get it done before mixing, or assume that you need to hire your mixer to also do that.
Yes, totally. That being said, and I know that I'm going to get messages like that, so I'm addressing it right away. I know that there are certain genres, and I love those types of music as well, and that's where I come from. I know there are certain things like punk rock and other stuff that you can get away with a vocal performance that is not quite in tune sometimes. Mm-hmm. But still, I would really be careful here and have a close, have an honest look on it and listen to it and decide if it really makes the song better to be off on that note, or if it's just because you want it on principle. Because it can have vibe and it can be okay in those genres, but I think it totally depends, and it's risky at least. So if you're sure what you're doing and if you think that's part of the aesthetic, and sometimes it really is, then it's okay to go without tuning. But it's always worth trying it and really thinking it through, because sometimes you think it shouldn't be tuned, but it should.
Yeah. I've put out tons of songs that have no tuning on it, but it's something that I've considered every time. So before I mix it, I decide if it needs to have this done to it. And that's kind of the main takeaway, right? Is it's something that's used to improve a performance. And if the performance sounds great, you're good. But it definitely could use it sometimes, and often does. Most of the time, there's some tuning to be done.
Yeah. And also, like I said, the best singers will need some tuning sometimes. It is not a sign of a bad performance or a bad performer. It's completely normal. And you will be surprised when you look in a tuning plugin, you look at a great performance, how far sometimes some notes are. And when you then tune it and you do an A/B test, you will find out how much better it works just now. It can be subtle things and you might not notice it before you tune it, but once you tune it and you listen to the whole song, it just sits better in there. It clicks, it goes together with the guitars and everything better. And so even really good singers can benefit from tuning a little bit. And sometimes those subtle corrections can make or break it, actually.
Yeah, something we've talked about a lot is guitar tuning, because it's a really hard thing to get done right. And I think episode 5 was all about guitar tone, and we definitely talked about this in depth on that episode. But there's this idea of compounded tuning or relative tuning, and essentially the your guitar, like your left and your right guitar and your bass are all going to be microcents off of each other in the end. It's really pretty much impossible to get them spot on, but we spend a lot of time getting them as close as we can so they sound in tune to us. And that applies to vocals as well. So your lead vocal might go down and it sounds really good. But once you start adding like a double or a triple or harmonies, low octave, all these different layers of vocals, they're all just this little bit out from each other. So, your double might be a little sharper, your harmony might be a little flat. And then once you combine these things, which all sound good on their own, it sounds like a mess because the tuning gets more and more chorusy and more loose. So that's where vocal correction can really save the day. Is just like kind of finding a common middle ground between all of these different takes and moving them all to be relatively closer to each other.
Sure. So maybe we should give you some of the tools or talk about some of the tools you can use if you want to try that. Just a quick overview of what is out there. I think the most popular ones are Melodyne, probably, and Autotune, like the OG.
And both are pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Just as a heads up. But they're really good tools.
Yeah. Is there a light or cheaper version of it that is enough to start with?
Melodyne, I believe, has like a kind of lower tier that does most of it. That's probably worth checking out. And I think, hopefully I don't get this wrong, but sorry, I'll Google it. Isotope has something as well. Pitch correction. That is, I haven't used this, so disclaimer. But it is called Nectar, and it has pitch correction in it, and it's pretty affordable as well, I believe.
Okay.
So there's those options for affordable ones. I would probably steer towards Melodyne because they're really a leader in the field. And then Autotune, my personal favorite, is just bloody expensive. So only for the very serious there. But once we move out of like the needing manual tuning, and if you're just looking to get an automatic tuner that you could just use for like referencing and singing into and stuff like that, it becomes much more affordable. And you've got Autotune RealTime, which is made by the same company, Autotune, but it just doesn't have the manual graph mode. And then there's Waves Tune RealTime as well. And that one's great. I think I got it for like $29 on sale. So you can't really go wrong with something like that. That does bring up one more manual tuner, which is made by Waves as well. It's called Waves Tune. Have you used that, Benny?
I have, but to be honest,
it's awful.
Yeah, it's awful. Exactly.
It's a piece of shit. I'm going to swear.
Yeah,
it's a fucking piece of shit.
It's absolutely right. So, I don't want to say things like that if I didn't spend enough time with it, and I didn't really spend a lot of time with it, but my thoughts were exactly the same. It's awful.
I spent a lot of time with it. That's why I hate it so much.
Okay, yeah. So same here. I don't use it ever, and I also think it sucks. But maybe I'm sure there are some people out there who get great results with it, but I don't. So
yeah,
I don't like the workflow and GUI and everything. So
yeah, I almost feel like that's worth mentioning is that almost all of these tuners seem to have weird glitches. Like it's really complicated software and processing. So there's kind of things that just go wrong randomly. Like Autotune even still will sometimes just jump an octave. So all of a sudden you've got a chipmunk voice and you figure out these ways to quickly correct the problem. That shouldn't have happened in the first place, but you just learn these tricks to make the software work. But Waves Tune is just unconquerable. It's so time consuming, and I'm currently helping a friend. Kind of like he's sending me stuff that he's recording on his own, and he's asking for advice, and he's using Waves Tune to tune his vocal. And I warned him, and he's just having the biggest nightmare.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, don't use that. And or maybe I don't know if you get it cheap or whatever, try it. But I wouldn't recommend getting it if you're shopping for the first software. But there is an interesting feature in many DAWs nowadays. So I use Cubase, and Cubase has actually a great tuning thing built into it, and I use it a lot. I use it all the time. That's actually cool. Because it's just so. Yeah, the workflow is just great and intuitive, and it can do a lot of things. So that is great. I think Logic has a similar one. I don't know if that is great, but I know it's there. Or I think it's there. Am I wrong here? I don't know. but I think Logic has
Logic,
one.
I think, does have one. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. Pro Tools definitely doesn't.
Pro Tools doesn't know. And I don't know about Reaper or other software. You might have to look it up, but there are DAWs that incorporate that. And I think one day Pro Tools will as well, because it kind of is the standard for a couple of years now in Cubase and Logic and stuff. So
in about 10 years, Pro Tools might have it.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but you can start with that. You can use that. And to this day, even although I own Melodyne and Autotune, I still use Cubase tuning. It's just great. So yeah, that's basically it. I mean, I think the main takeaway here is just that you don't need to be afraid of it, and that it's just a completely normal thing, and that it's there to help your song. And even if you make organic sounding, real sounding music, it's worth thinking about tuning. And probably most of your favorite records, the vocals have been tuned. So yeah, that's just the main takeaway here, I think. And whenever people think of Autotune, they have this funny thing that they hear in their heads, but that is not what it is, actually. And that's what we want to show you with this episode.
It can be if you want.
It can be.
It doesn't have to be that. I just want to mention there's one more kind of tuning that's probably worth mentioning, and it's like just pitch shifting plugins, which I believe every DAW would have one of those at least. What they do is just change all the audio up or down, however many cents or semitones or tones do you want. So not really very useful in a pitch correction, vocal pitch correction situation. I've seen it used well on screams and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where you just take everything up and down, but it's kind of tricky, and you have to use your ear because there's no visual kind of feedback to what's happening.
Yeah.
But worth mentioning.
Yeah, worth mentioning, and especially because if you don't have any of these more expensive tuning softwares, and your DAW doesn't have a function like that, but you still want to start trying to tune your vocals, you can actually grab like a single note that is off, or you can grab the worst parts of a performance, quote unquote worst parts, and then isolate them, make them another track or another file or whatever, and then just use a plugin like that and correct them that way, and just move them up or down a bit. And that could be a start, so you can experiment with vocal tuning. And sometimes most of the performance is okay, but then there might be this long note that is just slightly flat or sharp, and then you can just grab that one, isolate it, and then move it up or down. And that could be a great start. And most DAWs have some function like that built into it.
Totally.
Okay. If you are interested in learning more about recording yourself, and Malcolm mentioned it a couple of times that the last episodes were pretty like the big picture episodes with the order of things, pre-production, what a producer actually does, stuff like that. So if you listen to those and you want to learn more about like the actual process, and if you want to like get like a start to finish system for recording your own band, you can go to the selfrecordingband.com/10-step guide, and you can download a free PDF that's a 10-step guide to successful DIY recording. It's like a mini ebook thing that walks you through the entire process from writing, arranging, producing, editing, mixing, all that. And you can see how records are made basically, and how you would go about it if you wanted to record your own band. So if you enjoyed this podcast and want to go deeper, go download that. It's the selfrecordingband.com/10-step guide. All right. I think that is it for today's episode.
That's it. Right on. Hope you enjoyed it, guys. See you next week.
See you next week. Bye. Thank you for listening.